Picture this. A young woman stands at her palace window, watching the morning mist rise over the Belgian countryside. She's just 24 years old, yet her eyes hold the weight of a lifetime's worth of sorrow. In her trembling hands, she clutches a letter that will change everything. News of her husband's death, discovered in a hunting lodge with his teenage mistress. But this moment of devastating revelation is merely the climax of a story that began decades earlier, in the gilded halls of European royalty, where a little girl named Stephanie was born into what seemed like a fairy tale, only to discover that some fairy tales are actually nightmares in disguise. This is the untold story of Princess Stephanie of Belgium, a woman whose life reads like the most tragic opera ever written, filled with betrayal, disease, impossible choices, and ultimately a quiet kind of courage that sustained her through 6 decades of heartbreak. If you're drawn to stories of real women who faced unimaginable challenges with grace, I invite you to subscribe and join our community of history lovers. Your likes and comments help these forgotten stories reach others who might need to hear them, and I always love reading your thoughts below. Let me take you back to May 21st, 1864, when the first scene of our story unfolds in the Palace of Laeken, nestled in the peaceful suburbs of Brussels. The sound of church bells rings across the Belgian countryside, announcing the birth of a princess. Baby Stephanie enters the world during a time of great change. Her grandfather, Leopold I, still rules as Belgium's founding king, having guided this young nation to independence just 33 years earlier. Her father, Prince Leopold, paces the palace corridors with the restless energy of a man destined for power. He dreams of making Belgium matter on the world stage, despite its modest size wedged between the great powers of France and Germany. Little does anyone know that this ambitious prince will one day become one of history's most controversial monarchs, his legacy forever stained by the blood of millions in the Congo. But when Stephanie is barely 18 months old, the palace bells toll again, but this time in mourning. Her grandfather has died, and suddenly her father ascends to the throne as King Leopold II. The little girl toddles through halls that now echo with the weight of absolute power, her small footsteps marking the beginning of a reign that will transform Belgium into a land of magnificent palaces and grand civic buildings, all funded by wealth extracted from the suffering of Congolese people half a world away. But let's focus on the child herself, growing up in these opulent surroundings. Stephanie's mother, Marie Henrietta of Austria, carries herself with the practiced elegance of Habsburg royalty. She's a woman of refined tastes and artistic sensibilities, but her marriage to Leopold is purely political, a cold arrangement that grows chillier with each passing year. By the time Stephanie can walk and talk, she's already witnessing the slow-motion collapse of her parents' relationship, watching her mother retreat into increasingly long absences from the palace. The family portrait seems complete with 4 children: Louise, the eldest and most headstrong; Leopold, the precious male heir, born in 1859; Stephanie herself, and baby Clementine, who arrives when Stephanie is 8. Yet beneath this picture of royal prosperity, cracks are already forming that will shatter young Stephanie's world. January 1869 arrives like a cold blade cutting through the heart of the Belgian royal family. Little Prince Leopold, the boy who carried all of his father's dynastic hopes, falls gravely ill. Stephanie, now 4½, watches in confused terror as doctors rush through the palace corridors and her parents' faces grow ashen with worry. When her brother dies, the palace fills with a silence deeper than any she's ever known. The heir is gone, and with him, something irreplaceable breaks in her parents' marriage. But death isn't finished with the royal family yet. 2 years later, as Stephanie approaches her 7th birthday, a different kind of terror stalks the streets of Brussels. Disease, that great equalizer that respects no crown or title, sweeps through the city. Typhus, they call it, and it strikes down rich and poor alike. When the fever claims Stephanie, her small body burns like a candle flame in a hurricane. For weeks, she drifts between consciousness and delirium while her family keeps vigil beside her bed. Picture the scene: a little girl's labored breathing fills a palace room draped in heavy curtains, while outside, the normal sounds of city life continue. Her survival, when it finally comes, feels like a miracle. But the experience leaves invisible scars, a premature understanding that life can be snatched away without warning. Recovery brings a new chapter, the rigorous education befitting a princess. From 1875 onward, Stephanie finds herself thrust into adult responsibilities earlier than most children. Her sister Louise has left Belgium, while her mother increasingly absents herself from court life. At barely 11 years old, she often stands as the highest-ranking female royal at formal ceremonies, learning to carry herself with dignity while still longing to simply be a child. The tutors are strict, demanding perfection in languages, history, music, and deportment. Stephanie masters French, German, and English with fluency, but the lessons that matter most aren't found in any textbook. She's learning to read the subtle language of court politics, to smile graciously while her heart breaks, to present a composed facade no matter what storms rage beneath the surface. Then comes the winter of 1878, and with it, a meeting that will seal her fate. Picture a 14-year-old girl, still more child than woman, being introduced to Crown Prince Rudolph of Austria. He's 20, handsome in that particular way of Habsburg men, with their distinctive features and confident bearing. What she doesn't realize is that this seemingly casual introduction is actually the opening move in a carefully orchestrated diplomatic chess game. Behind closed doors, negotiations unfold like scenes from a political thriller. The Austrians need a bride for their heir, someone young, fertile, and from a respectable royal house. Stephanie fits their requirements perfectly. For Belgium, this marriage represents a chance to align with one of Europe's most powerful empires. The girl's own wishes, of course, are never consulted. The engagement period stretches across nearly 3 years, during which Stephanie transforms from a shy teenager into a young woman who understands her destiny. She knows that her life will not be her own, that her body exists primarily to produce male heirs for the Habsburg dynasty. When her wedding day arrives, on May 10, 1881, just days before her 17th birthday, Vienna stages a ceremony of breathtaking magnificence. Imagine the scene: St. Augustine's Church adorned with thousands of flowers, the streets lined with cheering crowds, the bride herself radiant in silk and diamonds. Yet if you look closely at the wedding photographs that survive, you might notice something in Stephanie's eyes, a kind of resigned acceptance that speaks volumes about the reality behind the fairy tale facade. The early months of marriage bring a cautious optimism. Rudolph can be charming when he chooses, and Stephanie allows herself to hope that affection might grow between them. Vienna welcomes her warmly, and for a brief moment it seems possible that this arranged marriage might evolve into something resembling happiness. But Rudolph carries demons that no amount of royal protocol can exorcise. His personality shifts like quicksilver, charming one moment, volatile the next. He drinks heavily, stays out until dawn, and shows little interest in the responsibilities that come with being heir to an empire. Stephanie finds herself increasingly isolated, watched constantly by court officials who monitor every aspect of her behavior. When she gives birth to daughter Elizabeth Marie in September 1883, Stephanie experiences the fierce joy of motherhood for the first and only time. But Rudolph's reaction to their daughter's birth reveals the depth of his disappointment. He wanted a son, an heir, and makes no effort to hide his feelings. The baby girl represents failure in his eyes, and he begins to distance himself even further from his young wife. What happens next unfolds like a medical nightmare that no princess should ever have to endure. Rudolph's nocturnal adventures aren't just about alcohol and gambling. He's pursuing other women with reckless abandon. The sexually transmitted diseases he contracts become Stephanie's burden to bear. By her early 20s, she's been infected with both syphilis and gonorrhea, conditions that ravage her reproductive system and leave her permanently sterile. The cruelest irony is that she doesn't even understand what's happening to her at first. The court doctors, bound by protocol and perhaps by orders from above, initially blame her condition on peritonitis. It's only later that she learns the devastating truth. Her husband's infidelity has stolen not just her health, but her future as a mother. Picture a young woman of 22, sitting alone in her ornate palace room, finally understanding that she will never hold another baby in her arms. The Habsburg dynasty has invested everything in her ability to produce male heirs, and she has been rendered incapable of fulfilling that fundamental expectation. The shame and rage she feels must be almost unbearable. Her marriage, which was never built on love, now becomes a battlefield. She refuses to share Rudolph's bed, knowing that intimacy with him will only bring more disease and humiliation. He, meanwhile, spirals deeper into self-destruction, his drinking heavier, his affairs more brazen, his behavior increasingly erratic. The most notorious of his many mistresses enters the story in 1888, Baroness Mary Vetsera, a 17-year-old girl from a lower noble family who becomes utterly captivated by the 30-year-old crown prince. Their affair plays out against the backdrop of Rudolph's deteriorating mental state, possibly accelerated by the advancing stages of syphilis affecting his brain. Rudolph has acquired a hunting lodge called Mayerling, about an hour's ride from Vienna. It becomes his refuge from court life, a place where he can indulge his darkest impulses away from the disapproving eyes of his father, Emperor Franz Joseph. Mary Vetsera accompanies him there frequently, and court gossips whisper about their increasingly intense relationship. The morning of January 30th, 1889 arrives, gray and cold. Stephanie is going about her usual routine when a palace official approaches with news that will echo through history. At Mayerling, Crown Prince Rudolph and Mary Vetsera have been found dead. The initial reports are confused, contradictory, but the truth gradually emerges like a photograph developing in chemical baths. Rudolph shot his teenage mistress first, then turned the gun on himself. The scandal sends shockwaves through the Habsburg court and across Europe. Stephanie, at 24, finds herself a widow, but more than that, she's a woman whose entire purpose in life has been negated. She cannot remarry within the Austrian royal family because she cannot bear children. She cannot return to Belgium because her daughter must remain in Vienna as a Habsburg princess. In the letter Rudolph leaves for her, he expresses something that might be mistaken for affection, but it feels hollow after years of betrayal and cruelty. Stephanie is trapped in a city that no longer wants her, a living reminder of a tragedy that the court would prefer to forget. Into this darkness steps Count Arthur Pododowski, a Polish nobleman who offers her genuine kindness and companionship. For a brief moment, Stephanie allows herself to believe in the possibility of love, real love, with a man who sees her as more than just a royal womb. But fate has more cruelty in store. Pododowski develops throat cancer, undergoes a failed surgery that leaves him unable to speak, and dies in March 1890. Twice in just over a year, death has claimed the men in Stephanie's life. The pattern seems almost biblical in its relentless tragedy. She escapes into travel, wandering the Mediterranean like a beautiful ghost, seeking something she cannot name in the ancient ruins of Malta, the souks of Tunisia, the olive groves of Sicily. Back in Belgium, King Leopold II watches his daughter's struggles with the calculating eye of a man who sees people primarily as political assets. He hatches a plan for her to marry Archduke Franz Ferdinand, Rudolph's successor as heir to Austria-Hungary. But Stephanie has endured enough political marriages. When she falls in love with Count Ilimer Lonyi, a Hungarian aristocrat, she chooses passion over protocol. The wedding takes place on March 22, 1900, at Miramare Castle near Trieste. Stephanie loses her imperial titles, but gains something far more precious, a marriage based on mutual affection and respect. Her father's fury at this unsuitable match leads to years of estrangement, but Stephanie has finally learned to put her own happiness first. The new century brings new challenges as Europe slides toward catastrophe. When Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the man her father once wanted her to marry, is assassinated in Sarajevo in 1914, the continent explodes into war. Stephanie and Eleanor find themselves in the uncomfortable position of living in Austria-Hungary while that empire occupies Belgium. They retreat to Eleanor's estate at Rusutz in what is now Slovakia, where Stephanie dedicates herself to charitable work. The woman who once lived for court ceremonies now finds purpose in helping others, using her position and resources to alleviate suffering where she can. The collapse of Austria-Hungary in 1918 marks the end of the world Stephanie has known since childhood. Empires that seemed eternal crumble into dust, but she and Eleanor adapt, finding happiness in their quiet life together. They travel when they can, host friends, and enjoy the simple pleasures that were denied to her during her first marriage. Her relationship with her daughter, Elizabeth Marie, becomes another source of pain. The girl has grown into a woman with strong socialist convictions, earning the nickname the Red Archduchess for her political activities. After a final argument in 1924, mother and daughter never speak again, another relationship claimed by the political upheavals of the age. In 1935, Stephanie publishes her memoirs under the title I Was to Be Empress. Tellingly, the book focuses almost entirely on her years as Rudolph's wife, ending with the tragedy at Mayerling. The subsequent 50 years of her life, including her happy second marriage, remain largely private. Perhaps some stories are too personal to share, or perhaps she understood that readers were most interested in the dramatic chapters of her youth. When World War II engulfs Europe, Stephanie and Eleanor are once again caught in the crossfire of history. As the Soviet Red Army advances into Central Europe in 1945, they take refuge at Pannonhalma Abbey. There, surrounded by centuries-old stone walls and the prayers of monks, Princess Stephanie of Belgium draws her final breath on August 23, 1945. She dies as she has lived for the past 45 years, quietly, with dignity, having survived every blow that fate could deliver. Her daughter does not attend the funeral, and she is buried in the abbey's crypt beside Eleanor, who follows her in death less than a year later. Looking back on Princess Stephanie's extraordinary life, we see a woman who embodies the resilience of her generation, those who lived through the collapse of the old European order and the birth of the modern world. Born into privilege but denied happiness, betrayed by her first husband but finding love with her second, she navigated loss and scandal with a grace that speaks to something essentially unbreakable in the human spirit. Her story reminds us that behind every historical headline, there are real people facing impossible choices with whatever courage they can muster. Stephanie's legacy isn't found in any crown she wore or title she held, but in her quiet determination to keep living, keep hoping, and keep finding meaning despite everything that tried to destroy her.